Timestamp. All right, let's get to work. So this is going to be the first of the Review Me series. I've already done the video where I asked you what your thoughts were on how to review, and have taken some of the suggestions that you guys have given, some of the suggestions you guys made as to categories or things you'd like to hear about within a review. I have added those. This format is open to change, just to see how long it takes to go through this. If there are parts of it that you're like, nah, actually, I don't want you to talk about that, we'll see how it goes. So, yes, let's jump into this. Timestamp. What is it? The first game that I'm going to be reviewing is Tetrarchia. Tetrarchia was sent to me from Draco Ideas. And recently, I actually haven't really heard much about this publisher and games that they've done. I have a older connection or relationship to them in the sense that they reached out to me, or I reached out to them. I can't really remember. Back when I worked for Game Tyrant, I ended up actually doing a YouTube video. The first video I ever did, which was much more awkward than this. This may still be incredibly awkward to you, but trust me, it was worse, way more awkward. And so I did a campaign video for, I think I always said Yohai in the video, but I think it's Yohei. It's Japanese like combat skirmish game that came out from Draco Ideas. And so I developed my relationship with them back then, and they reached out not too long ago. It's been a little bit. I've been a little slow to review games since the kid was born and just over the holidays, but they sent me Tetrarchia, and interestingly enough, Scope Stalingrad, which I have not reviewed yet, but which I just saw Tom Vassell review on the Dice Tower. So I thought that was cool that he also got that. I'll talk about that game when I get a play-in of it. I haven't played that particular two-player game yet. But what is it? Tetrarchia is a cooperative 1 to 4 player game. It takes about 30 minutes. It says 20 to 40 on the box, so that's pretty accurate. It's designed by Miguel Marques, and artwork is from Matias Cazorla. Which is interesting to me because I think of Cazorla as the soccer player or the football player for Arsenal back in the day. Anyways, Miguel Marques, Tetrarchia, published by Draco Ideas. This is a cooperative game where you function as the emperors or the first tetrarchy of the waning Roman Empire as invaders are starting to come in from different areas like the Gauls, who else besides the Gauls? Several different invading armies. And so I'm just going to pull it out. Because this is such a small game, I'm just going to pull it out. These are all of the components that you need, which I don't know if they typically come with this little handy organizer, but that's where they come in. And then you've got, your rule books, but this is the board. So it shows, kind of that central Mediterranean Sea where you've got Italy and you've got Greece and you've got, the Middle East over here, and then you've got Spain dipping down into the Iberian Peninsula and where it touches, the Strait of Gibraltar. All of those locations, you got Northern Africa there. And the goal is, the easiest way for me to describe this is, to me, it feels like Pandemic. You have a world, and instead of disease spreading and, inflaming and destroying the world, you have unrest turning into revolt, and revolt slowly destabilizing the Roman Empire, all while invading armies are slowly coming in from these outer territories and trying to progress and march towards Rome. You act as 4 different emperors of the Tetrarchy who all have different garrisons or strongholds within the Roman Empire, and your goal is to close off and secure the borders while maintaining control over the rising unrest and revolts. It says 1 to 4 player. One thing I'll probably get into it is where I feel like that may not be as accurate. But that's kind of the synopsis of the game and who did the art and who designed it. Timestamp. What's special or different? I think the unique thing about Tetrarchia that I like, that I don't necessarily feel the same. Once you add expansions into Pandemic, which I didn't do, I just played base Pandemic, and then I played Pandemic Legacy the very first season, season 1. We got season 2, but we never played it. I played season 1 and I played base Pandemic. I never really added in any other expansions. I think one time I played with a friend who had an expansion. Is that I feel like you can very much tweak this game to be as easy, as difficult, as nuanced as you want it to be. And I say that because it's got that built into it, like into the framework. You select the difficulty you want at the beginning. You can have the full amount of garrisons for your emperor, which are how you lock down locations and prevent unrest or revolt from appearing there unless there's a uprising, which is similar to the pandemic outbreak. And then you've got, 1, 2, or 3 Roman fleets that help you across these different sea zones. 1, 2, 3. Help you across those different sea zones and allow you to sail across the ocean rather than having to plot out a very long land route. And then you can also adjust how many revolts the game starts with, how many barbarian armies the game starts with. And then in addition to that, this set of components in the game also comes with expansion content, which I haven't dipped into. I have played this game on easy, medium, and difficult. I've won the difficult as well. So I've won every single time, but each time I've learned a little bit better about how to approach stuff. But you can include things to make the game more nuanced or simplistic in terms of making it easier for the emperors, or you can make it harder. There's pirates that you can bring in that compete for sea zones with your Roman navy. There's the Goths, which are a special type of invader. If you are having a harder time, or you want to balance out the exact difficulty setting you're at, you have the Ducks and Vicarious, who act as additional Roman leaders that you can use with certain limitations to their abilities. And so I think that the ways that you can tweak this make it very easy to craft an experience specific to what you want. And the other thing that I think makes this unique is this says it's a cooperative game for 1 to 4 players. And I get that in the sense that each player could control a different emperor. But the size of the board, to me, means that this is a 1-player game. It's a solo game, in my perspective. And then also, to me, the reason why I like it as a solo game is because then it avoids what I don't like about Pandemic, which is the ability to quarterback or to, have an alpha player who is telling people what to do or, coaching people through their turns, and everybody's trying to optimize, but maybe with quite a bit of restriction as to what the players feel they have agency in their turn. And so with this as a 1-player game or as a solo experience, it negates that. It avoids that pitfall as from a design perspective. And also, even more so than Pandemic, I wouldn't want 2 would be okay, but I wouldn't want 3 or 4 people to circle up around this board. This is a tiny board. And so, I don't even have a table small enough to allow people to have access close enough from 4 sides. So to me, what's special about it is that you can customize the experience pretty quickly and jump into the game, which only takes, 20 to 40 minutes. And you can tailor it to your desire for maybe that playthrough or maybe your entire style in the way that you approach, constant management games like this, where you're trying to make things not fully fall apart. And then also the fact that this can be a solo experience and avoid things I dislike about games like Pandemic. I think that's what's special or what's different. Timestamp. Difficulty to table or accessibility. So I would say that this is a double-edged sword. It is very accessible and easy to table from the perspective of the size of the game and the quickness with which you can set it up, even with the modifications that you make given the rules. So it is very accessible or easy to table there. There are two ways in which it's difficult to table and inaccessible. Number one is sometimes the rule book. The rule book is, and this is something I've experienced. So Draco Ideas is a Spanish publisher. So, English is not the first language. And sometimes it definitely feels that way when you are reading the rules. There are ways in which the language can be too wordy or to where they almost over-explain or provide, rule explanations that seem not obfuscated, but a little opaque. Specifically, the place I think about is how you do the math for combat with the emperors and the barbarian armies. I just feel like they tried to essentially make it into like an order of operations math problem for the players. And I think it would have just been easier if you explained it in text. There were numerous times when I was like, addition before subtraction, then multiplication, all within parentheses. And it just there's an easier way to go about that. And I felt that a couple of times through reading the rules. So very accessible to table in terms of size of game, ease of components, and simplicity with which you modify or adjust the game difficulty. But a little inaccessible in terms of managing the rule book, and then also difficulty to table in terms of player count. Because if you see a game like this and you're like, oh, 1 to 4 players, I could definitely, bring in my regular game group of 3 or 4 people, I think you're going to be a little disappointed by the size of the board and the way that the gameplay is accessible to more than 1 or maybe 2 people. I would say 2 is the max that I'd stretch this at, which brings me to the next section. Player count. What is the optimal player count for this game? I think it's just 1. I think the best player count for Tetrarchia is 1. It's a solid little solo box that you can pop out and bring, and you can make it as difficult as you want, have as much, revolt and barbarian armies that are starting the game that you immediately have to manage, and you have a limited amount of actions. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't think I could, in good conscience, recommend this above 2 players. I will play this solo. For however long I have it in my collection, I will just play this solo. You could play it 2 players. If you have, a gaming partner that you usually are with, and you guys don't mind games where you're essentially solving the puzzle together rather than independently contributing to the puzzle, I think that's where this is going to shine. I think 3 or 4 would be a bloated, cramped experience, if that makes any sense. Both bloated in the fact that you have too many players for not enough decisions, and cramped in the sense that you have so many players around such a small experience. So 1 player is my optimal, with the caveat that you could do 2 if it makes sense for how you play games and who you play games with. Timestamp. Audience. Who is this for? This game for me is for gamers who are solo gamers and just like to break out small box experiences, stuff like Black Sonata, stuff like, Tetrarchia, stuff like the Tiny Epic series. If you have small box games or Unbroken and Set a Watch, different 1-player accessible experiences that are smaller, I think that's pretty much who this is made for. The only other genre or class of board gamer that I would add onto that is just fans of cooperative games. This is a cooperative game. It's designed as such. I think it's cooperative in the sense that you're cooperating with yourself as a solo player. But if you are people who are really into cooperative experiences, if you like Pandemic, which this reminds me of in certain ways, then I think you would find something to appreciate here. It does some interesting stuff, but I don't necessarily think it's as inviting or appealing to a larger group of 3 or 4, even though it says it's available to that. So, fans of cooperative games and solo gamers. Timestamp, theme and mechanics. I like how this works, because typically on the board, if you start off with nothing and you're rolling, what happens is you go in the color order of Rome. So you go the green emperor, the yellow, the red, and then the blue, and you follow that process the entire time. And then on each emperor's turn, they get 6 actions or 6, like time action points, of which different actions can be a different amount of points. Maybe one costs 3, one costs 2, one costs 1. You use up to 6 action points on your turn, and then you roll to see the activity of unrest and revolt on the map, and then you see if there are barbarian armies, if they are going to start advancing across the map on their path to Rome. So I like the aspect of managing unrest and revolt. And one thing that I do appreciate is that, in Pandemic you get disease cubes and they're there. You have to deal with them. In this, it doesn't immediately turn to revolt. It starts with unrest. And then if that section gets spiked again, or if it becomes connected to a revolt, it's like the revolt spreads. And so that slower building, antagonistic force in this game is interesting. I like that. I will say that the thing that I probably appreciate the most is that the unrest and the revolt, that's the true danger, is the sickness from within, which to me matches with the history of the Roman Empire and how it fell. Yes, the invading armies were a problem, and they presented an outside struggle for the emperors and for the armies to fight against, but the true danger was from the cracks within the empire, within the foundation, and how the people were the ones that started to revolt against, the emperor and the structure and the government in general. And that's true in this case. The armies are a problem. You do need to deal with them, but they are strengthened and made much more dangerous by spreading sickness, the spreading, revolt that exists within all of these territories. So I think that is a cool thematic integration to the mechanics. It feels natural to the history, and even the expansions with all some of the different add-ons and the Goths, it felt thematically tied. And one thing that I appreciated was that the back of the book, I haven't even touched this section yet, but there are historical scenarios that you are able to set up and play. You can do the Carousesian Revolt, you can do the Danubian Wars, the Mauritanian War, the Great Persian War. You can set up several different scenarios here and play through them, which I felt tied well with the theme, with the history, and just with the style. And I think that, the connections, one of the things I like a lot is that when you are looking to see whether revolt spreads or whether armies progress, if you can see where these territories connect to each other, they either have one unbroken line or they have a line that is broken by kind of 2 dashes. And what those 2 dashes signify is difficult terrain, which, mountains and rivers and places where it would be difficult for people or for armies to spread. And in the game, when you have either revolt spreading across that or armies marching across that, they have to make a roll to see if they're successful because they're passing difficult terrain. And so I like that. And also the way that armies move is not the most direct path towards Rome. They move in a set pattern that kind of follows the topography and the history of where these armies would have actually moved. Instead of, for instance, moving through the Alps, they would skirt around it and it would take much longer, but they would avoid that very treacherous terrain. And so a lot of stuff here feels like it's true to history, and I like that thematic integration there. Timestamp. Art. The art is okay. It's just a map. And then the pieces themselves are just blank colors. This is not a game that you would get into it for the art. It looks fine. It looks like a historical-ish map. It looks like if Pandemic had a historical map. And, you have very basic art. Even on the box, it's just kind of much more reserved and plain type of aesthetic. So not that crazy. Timestamp. What type of fun did I have with this game? I think that when I was playing this, I was saying to myself, this is essentially my Pandemic. I got rid of Pandemic because I didn't like it anymore and I didn't care for how it developed player interaction, which is something I care a lot about in games when I'm playing multiplayer games. And I ended up not feeling like I needed it anymore. So I got rid of it when I moved here to Arkansas from Texas. I finally just said, no, okay, I'm done. I'm going to donate it to a library. So I got rid of it. And I feel like this is a small enough box, though, that this is not obtrusive in the way in my collection. And because of how quickly you can tweak and modify and create a harder experience, I do think that there is the possibility of finding your sweet spot, of finding the right level of difficulty, the right level of setup between the seas and the fleets and the armies to make a really challenging experience for yourself. And also the idea that I could explore the historical scenarios is neato. So I had fun with it. I don't think that this is one where when I have 30 minutes that I'm going to be like, oh my gosh, I want to get Tetrarchia out over all of the others. I don't necessarily think it's going to be at that point for me, but it's an exciting game that I would like to keep trying before I consider getting rid of it. So I definitely want to explore more of the historical scenarios and check it out. Timestamp. Likes versus dislikes. And I like that it's a small board. I like that it's an easy solo experience. I like that you can modify the game, play to tweak your difficulty how you want. I like that there are historical scenarios. And I like that the solo aspect avoids the cooperative aspect that I don't typically like. And it's a small box, so accessible to play. Things I don't like. I don't think the rulebook hit as hard as it could have. The artwork is not as eye-catching or appealing. It doesn't strike you if it's a smaller experience like this. Sometimes I want what art is there to pop more. And I kind of forgive bigger games that do more for me for not having as much art. For example, Dune Imperium. Absolutely love that game. Trash look. Like it just doesn't look good. It looks very plain. It looks very simple. It looks like something that wasn't given as much attention from the artistic perspective, but I don't care. I forgive it because I like the game so much. Smaller games like this, I kind of want them to look more special when I table them because they're smaller. Radlands, small package. If you don't use the play mats, it's a very small box, but wow, like, it looks fantastic when you get it on the table. It looks gorgeous. It pops. People want to look at it. This, not so much. So the art wasn't as big for me. Let's see. Yeah, the rules and the art were probably the two biggest things I didn't care as much for. I also don't love it when games player count to me is important. Player count to me is a valuable thing by which I judge a game and whether it's right for me. And so even if a game can support a certain player count, if it can support it, I don't really want it to advertise that unless it's also a solid experience there. And I just don't even see, I haven't tried it. I don't even see how this would be a fun 3 or 4 player experience. Can't even imagine. So to me, like, this is just something I'll just say like 1 or 2 players. And I get it. It's a technical thing, and people could purchase it and play it with that intent. But to me, this is a solo game that could play okay at 2. So I don't love that, but that's not really against this game. That's more just like about the general state of marketing player count for board games that I don't always love. I'd much rather have just the 1 or 2 player counts that this works best at. That's kind of what I would prefer. But that's not a really fair criticism, but it's something I feel. All right, timestamp. And then rating. Last thing on the review me, rating. I would give this, at current point, a 7 out of 10. And I think that depending on the historical scenarios and depending on my ability to continue to tweak the difficulty to scale it to just that right amount for me, I think the scenarios and the difficulty scaling that I'm able to do Could bump this up to a 7.5 over the course of more games. And then also just if I feel like the gameplay gets stale and I'm approaching it the same way strategically, if I'm just not as enamored with that was a big yawn. Did not sleep well, and my cold brewed tea, my cold steeped tea is not kicking it off just yet. And so I feel like if I get bored with the gameplay, I feel like it could dip down to like a 6.5, which is probably going to get it closer to me wanting it to leave. So I'm either going to find a sweet spot and enjoy some of the stuff I haven't touched yet, like the expansion content and the historical scenarios, and it's going to bump up a little bit and maybe stay for a while, or I'm going to get a little tired by it and phased out, and it may drop down to like a 6.5 or something like that for my experience, and I'll want it to leave the collection just for the sake of space and for the sake of logistics. So that's where I'm at right now. I feel like it's a 7 out of 10. I feel like it's a solid experience. I vote it as a solo game, but that's for you to decide. That's not on me. So yeah, first review in the books. Let me know what you guys think of the different things that we talk about. I will have them timestamped, which I forgot on the other one, on the crowdfunding look. So I'll have them timestamped so you guys can check them out. Tetrarchia, Miguel Marques.